Hello again, this is Tony Wright, First Love Christian Church, FLCC, A.D. Wright Ministries. You know this is day 33 of our 90-day Bible study. We're in 2 Chronicles, 23rd chapter, 16th verse, and we'll be going through the 35th chapter and the 15th verse. So at the end of yesterday's reading, they had just brought Joash out of hiding at the age of 7. And he was to be rightfully crowned as the king. Now his mother, Athaliah, had killed her other sons and assumed reign at the death of her older son, Ahaziah. But they brought him out, made him king at age 7. Don't worry though, he got a lot of seasoned guidance from Jehoiada the priest. And as time would tell, the king and the people were kept on track primarily due to the wisdom of Jehoiada. But Judah made a covenant with Joash and with God that they would follow after God's ways and keep his commandments. So they tore down the house of Baal and they slew the priests of Baal. They reestablished the positions of priests back into the hands, put that back into the hands of the Levites. That's who was supposed to have been handling those responsibilities. And they placed, the people back into their respective positions so that the temple could operate properly. And the people were happy again, and there was peace in the land once again. And Joash, he grew into his own, and he followed after the ways of God. And eventually, as he grew older, the priest, Jehoiada, gave him 2 wives, and him and his wives had sons and daughters. Then Joash was prompted to repair the house of the Lord. So he called the people together and told them to go out and gather money for the repairs. So Jehoiada had the Levites go out and gather the collection, and they did this day after day. So eventually the work began. And they continued with the work until the repairs were completed. Now, then they made vessels and items to be placed in the temple, and they put those back in place inside of the temple. And when the work was complete, everybody rejoiced at the accomplishment that they had achieved. And all the days of Jehoiada, the priest, Judah followed the practices according to the covenant they had made with the Lord. And then Jehoiada, he died. And shortly after that, the people went right back to their old ways. And the princes of Judah started coming and praising the king and showing all the reverence and stuff to him. And then the people began to worship idols again. And they stood those groves back up. And although God's wrath was provoked, God sent prophets to Joash and to Judah to try to get them to correct their ways. But Judah, they refused to listen to the prophets. So even when Jehoiada's son, Zechariah, came and prophesied to them about what was going to occur, the king ordered that he be stoned to death. And then the king said that the Lord required that he be put to death. Boy, the things that we put on God. You hear me? So Joash's disobedience resulted in Judah being attacked by Syria. And shortly after Syria left, Joash was killed by his own servants. And then Amaziah, his son, took the throne. Now, Amaziah did pretty much what was right in the sight of the Lord. And he pretty much restored Judah back to the rightful place of worship. And the armies were, set back into place. And the country was strong once again for their obedience and for, their following the commandments of God. Then Judah went to war with the Edomites. But when they defeated the Edomites, Amaziah brought back some of their gods and set them up and worshiped them. What? Yep, here we go again. So the prophet came back and reminded him of his trespass and the pending punishment for his actions. So Joash, the king of Israel, came and they overtook Jerusalem. Now, this is a different Joash, right? This one ruled in Israel. Came and overtook Jerusalem, took all the gold and silver and all the vessels from the house of the Lord, and they took hostages and returned to Samaria. Now, Amaziah, he lived for about 15 years after the death of this Joash. And then his son, Uzziah, took the seat on the throne. And Uzziah reigned for 52 years. And he did what was right in the sight of the Lord. And Zechariah was likely a prophet during his time, gave him a lot of counsel in the early years of his reign, Uzziah. And Uzziah, he restored and fortified the walls of the city and built towers on every corner. And he was able to go out and recapture a lot of the spoils that had been taken away by the other nations that had attacked Judah over the time. But like many other leaders, King Uzziah, he began to believe his own hype. And before you knew it, he was going into the temple to burn incense. And those things were limited to the Levites, remember? So Azariah the priest and about 80 other priests went in after this dude. And Azariah chastened him for what he had done, knowing that the Levites were the only ones that should do that. And the king was livid. And I'm sure that he would have retaliated, except that while he was in the middle of his, being all steamed up, God hit him with leprosy. Bam! He ran out of the temple. And from that point on, he was cut off from his people and from the house of the Lord, because lepers were in seclusion. So until his death, his son Jotham had to take over the duties from the time that he was stricken, even through his death. So Jotham did mostly what was right in the sight of the Lord, but he didn't go worship in the temple of the Lord. And the people, they continued to behave in what was pretty often pretty corrupt ways. But Jotham continued much of the work that his father Uzziah had started. And he built cities in the surrounding mountain regions and continued their successes in battle as well. And eventually he became revered and esteemed in his own ways, in his own rights, as being a mighty king in a lot of ways. And then he died, and his son Ahaz came to reign. And he was totally contrary to the ways of his father and grandfather, for that matter. Instead, he reigned in the ways of the king of Israel. And he worshiped Baal, sacrificed his children to God. And he sacrificed and worshiped in high places. And God gave him and Judah over into the hands of Syria. And Syria defeated them and took many of them captive. And he was also defeated by Israel. And Israel took a lot of them captive as well. And it was only because of the prophecy of Obed that Israel returned those that had been taken captive back, for their fear of, wrath coming on them by God, because Obed told them, God's people don't take God's people. But boy, Ahaz, he did it all. Now, he went, out to strike a deal with Assyria to get them to protect him from the Edomites and from Israel. And he gave a lot of the wealth of Judah to Assyria, but they didn't even help it. So then he sacrificed to the gods of Syria, saying that since their gods helped Syria defeat everybody else, that maybe those same gods would help him. This dude right here, boy. and of course, that continued to provoke, God to more anger. So when Ahaz died, his son Hezekiah began to reign. And he did what was right in the sight of the Lord. And he repaired the temple and the doors of the temple, restored temple worship, and then he brought back the priests and the Levites and put them in their proper place in the temple operation. And the priests and the Levites, he had them sanctified, and the temple was cleansed and sanctified, and they cleansed and sanctified all of the vessels and things that were to go into the temple. And then they made offerings and sacrifice to God. And Hezekiah, he reached out to Israel so that he could restore the Passover. And God prepared and sanctified the people to prepare them for the Passover. And the people rejoiced because they hadn't, really observed Passover like that since the time of King Solomon. And all the high places, Hezekiah had them torn down, and he reinitiated the practice of giving to the priests and to the Levites, so that those priests and Levites could devote their time and attention to performing the service of things to the Lord, right? And he did all he did with a pure heart and out of just sheer obedience to the Lord. And God prospered him. And when Assyria gathered to come against Judah, Hezekiah went before the Lord and asked God to intervene. And of course, Assyria's king, Sennacherib, had blasphemed against God. And God told Hezekiah that he would work on Hezekiah's behalf. So when Assyria attacked, they were soundly defeated. You hear me? And then the king, when he returned back to his home, he was killed by his own son. And later, when Hezekiah became sick and he was told he wouldn't live, well, he turned his face to the wall, prayed to God, he cried, And he was appealing to God because he said that he had worked to serve God and God only and had followed his ways and obeyed his commandments. So God agreed that he was going to let Hezekiah live. And not only that, he added 15 years to Hezekiah's life. So Hezekiah continued to prosper right on up until he died. And then after he died, his son Manasseh reigned after him. And this dude right here was straight evil. You hear me? And he built back all these places of idol worship and Baal worship. And he put the altars and the groves for idol worship back into place so he could worship other gods, boy. And he did anything and everything that he could that was wrong. Trust me. Until God had enough. and then caused him to be captured by Assyria. And buddy, that got his attention. Yes, sir. So Manasseh, next thing you know, he started repenting. Boy, he sought the Lord. But God heard it and had him be returned to Jerusalem. And when he returned, though, he knew for sure that the Lord, he was God. So boy, when he got back, they went on a cleanup tour. Are you kidding me? But this dude had done so much foolishness that God was still determined that Judah was going to have to pay for their transgressions. Now, after Manasseh's death, though, his son Amon came to the throne. And he went right back to the foolish antics of their past and doing completely evil things. And the people rose up against him. And his own servants, after 2 years, killed him. After just 2 years of reign. And he was replaced by Josiah. And Josiah, he was another one of those good kings that did what the Lord said do. And so he immediately moved to tear down those places of Baal worship and idol worship and destroy all these idols and molded images. And Hilkiah, his priest, found a book of the law and gave it to him. And he gave it to the scribe, and the scribe brought it to the king. And the scribe read it to the king, King Josiah, and Josiah was just overwhelmed for how Judah had misbehaved before God. And Josiah, he sought guidance for what they should do. So they went, to the prophetess Huldah, and she told them that Judah was going to suffer because of their wrong, but that Josiah wasn't going to have to see or endure that wrath, that it was going to come after he was gone. So Josiah, he gathered the elders and went up to the house of the Lord with all the people and the Levites, and he got before the Lord, and he made a covenant with the Lord and committed to walk after God and to keep his commandments. And all the people, they agreed to keep God's commandments as well. And then Josiah had them prepare to keep the Passover. And they each took on their roles in putting things in place to observe the Passover. And they all prepared for that. Now, speaking of preparing, I'm preparing to get out of here. But you know that I will be back as long as God keeps throwing favor my way, that is, But until I get back with you, keep reading this word and keep checking us out. I don't care whether it's on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever is your preferred social media platform. Check us out. And then hit somebody up and tell your friends and tell your neighbors that FLCC, tell them that we're taking ministry back to the first love.